We're going to be going over leasing and property management. It would be Unit 22 if you're in the 14th edition of Dearborn. And this is what you need to know to pass your state exam. So property management is the fastest growing area of real estate. And lenders and institutions hire real estate licensees to professionally manage their properties. Okay. In Pennsylvania, a property manager serving the public for a fee must be a licensed broker. Okay. I would know that. In Pennsylvania, you have to be a licensed broker. So let's talk about the different lease agreements. Now, we went over a good bit of this when we went over lease agreements early on, didn't we? In the fundamental section. So a lease basically combines two contracts, a conveyance of possession to the real estate and a contract to pay rent and maybe even assume other obligations as far as paying certain utilities. So the landlord receives payment of rent for the use of the premises, and the landlord retains a reversionary right to possession at the end of the lease. So when we're talking about the bundle of rights, so I'm the landlord of the property. I give Vaughnie the right, here's the bundle of sticks. I give her the right of possession. Vaughn, I give you the right of possession. You don't have to come get it.
Oh, okay.
And then I remain the rest of the rights. And then when she's done with the lease, I get the possession back. Okay. Now she would have the right also of quiet enjoyment. So nobody could say, Vaughnie, you have to leave those premises, right? Isn't that what quiet enjoyment means? Doesn't mean that the neighbors can't play the stereo. It means nobody can come in there and say, hey, we have a right to access the property, even though you have a lease. You know, so the quiet enjoyment is nobody can interfere with her rights according to that lease. So let's talk about different lease agreements. Requirements of a valid lease. Capacity to the contract. You have to be a legal wage. Has to be legal objections. Okay. There has to be an offer and acceptance of the lease. And there has to be consideration in it. So I would know those 4 requirements to a valid lease. If you want to write those down. We just got started, Samantha, so you're okay. Don't stress. Okay. And a lot of times, pre-printed forms are the best for residential use. Commercial is typically a little bit more complicated.
Wait, don't change it.
So possession of the premise, again, Vaughnie gets quiet enjoyment. Nobody could come in if she has a year's lease 6 months in and say, hey, I bought the building, you got to get out, or I have a right to use it. You know, she has quiet enjoyment where nobody can interfere on her rights. And there has to be in the lease conditions under which the landlord can enter. Okay. So he just can't show up on Vaughnie's door and come busting in anytime he wants. There has to be some language in the lease stating when the landlord can enter. Also, it has to spell out in the lease the use of the premise, terms in the lease, how long it's going to be, any restrictions in a commercial space, and it has to be for a lawful purpose. Okay. In Pennsylvania, transfer taxes on leases longer than 30 years. Are you gonna go down and get those,
Oh, yeah.
tests? Yeah, scoot out of here. Don't worry, I'll be at least an hour here, if not more. So. Security deposit in Pennsylvania may not be considered rent. And depending on how much the deposit is, will determine if interest has to be paid on that. Thank you, Andrew. You can also have a bond in lieu of a deposit. Somebody could put up a bond. And the Landlord Tenant Act of 1951 determined the security deposit amounts may not be used as the last month's rent. So a lot of times people are in a lease and the last month they say, just use my security deposit. Can't do that, Christine. Can't do that. May not be used for the last month's rent, okay? And the maximum amount of the deposit is determined by the lease length. So how much, let's look at that. For informational purposes, that's the lease. You could burn through those pages in the book. So what's the maximum deposit a landlord can charge for charge?
2 months, right?
2 months rent? Okay. And then if the lease is over what period of time, is that reduced to 1 month?
A year? A year.
A year?
Yeah.
After 1 year, it's
You didn't hear me
reduced.
the first time, huh?
Yeah. You did go with that. You did go with that, boy. Maintenance of the premises. A residential,
I have no clue.
Okay.
We're
456.
I'm just going along.
456.
Thank you. My book's different anyways.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I don't have leases in
Yeah.
mine.
look in the front, at the front of the book, and they'll tell you what chapter to go to. Front of the book, Vaughn. So residential leaseors, who's the leaseor? The landlord or the tenant? Landlord. Okay. Must maintain a dwelling unit in a habitable condition. And residential tenants must return it in the same condition they received. Typically with commercial, the tenant maintains the building with the maintenance. Residential, typically the landlord does. Okay, so in my wife's, it snowballs if the lights short out and you need new lights in the room, Neen is responsible. If the plumbing springs a leak and the faucet starts leaking, Neen's responsible because it's a commercial lease and that's the way it's drawn up. On residential, Lauren, typically the landlord's responsible for those items. Recording of a lease. The lease would be recorded in the county that the property's in, if it was recording. Not usually for residential tenants, often for leases longer than 3 years. And I think, so typically leases are not recorded. Typically leases are not recorded. But some leases may have an option in them, Jared.
No, mine doesn't
Jason.
have anything about leases.
Okay.
That's why I'm so lost.
Look in the back of the book under leases.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pull up this.
Okay. So an option, some leases may have an option to buy. And that grants the leasee the option to renew or extend the lease also. So Nina's lease on her commercial gave her an option to renew it. on a year-to-year basis for a period of 10 years. So a lot of times the leasee has the option. What kind of an agreement is an option agreement? Is it unilateral or bilateral? Who said that? Unilateral, right. Because if I'm giving the option, the leasee does not have to exercise the option, but if he does, I'm required to go through with it. So it's unilateral. A sales agreement is what? Unilateral or bilateral? What kind of contract's a sales agreement? Unilateral or bilateral? Bilateral. Both parties have to perform, right? How about a listing agreement? Unilateral or bilateral?
Unilateral.
Unilateral. Seller's required to pay a fee. I'm not required to sell the property. Okay? How do we discharge the lease? How do we discharge the lease? When all parties fulfill their agreement. If the lease was for 1 year, at the end of that year, if everybody's fulfilled their agreement, the lease would be discharged. If there's destruction of the premises, and if only part of the premises is destroyed, the tenant may reduce his rent and still stay there. You can assign a lease. If it's written in the lease, it's assignable. And that's where the leaseholder can assign all of his interest to another party. So on Nina's lease, we have a clause in there that she can assign that lease. Somebody could sublet it. And subleasing is transferring the lease to another party. To another party. Let's talk a little bit about a breach of lease. So if somebody breaches the lease, they typically, the tenant doesn't make their rent payments. The landlord then could sue for possession. In Pennsylvania, if there's a breach of lease, 15 days to 3 months notice must be given for the tenant to vacate. Okay, so depending on the time of year, Ray, in the winter time, you may have to give a month, maybe 3 months. In the summertime, you may be able to get away with 15 days. Talk to your broker. He will talk to the magistrate and find out what the policy is in that particular area. Only a constable can forcefully remove a tenant's belongings. We went over a lot of this already, didn't we? Okay, good. So we'll be able to breeze through it. And in Pennsylvania, again, the landlord must warrant that the property is habitable, according to the Landlord Act. Fair housing and civil rights laws. And we're going to get into federal laws a little bit more in this chapter. They affect the landlord and tenants. You cannot discriminate for the protective classes. All people, regardless, must have an opportunity to rent. And all people, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, marital status, disabilities, must have access. So let's talk a little bit about the types of leases. Okay? The types of leases. And I want you to look that over for 1 second, and I'll be right back. I want you to look at the types of leases over for 1 second.
We don't have none of it. No, my title is just property management. Yours is leasing.
Mhm. That's weird.
Okay, what page are we in the book, guys?
62.
What page?
462.
There's a gross lease, right? Where is a gross lease typically used? And we went through all these, so we should be able to breeze through this.
Residential,
No?
commercial.
What kind of commercial? A gross lease.
It says residential.
What's that?
It says residential for gross lease.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And commercial.
What's that?
Mine says
Yeah, a
residential.
gross lease, the tenant pays a fixed rental and the landlord pays all the taxes, insurance, mortgage payments, and utilities. So typically that's a residential lease, I'm sorry, and some commercial, if you're renting an office space. And then how about a net lease?
Tenant pays all or most of the operating expenses.
Right,
Commercial lease.
right. So a net lease, the tenant's paying even some of the operating, maybe taxes, insurance. How about a percentage lease? Where would a percentage lease be used at?
It's basic rent plus percent of gross sales.
Right, so maybe in a mall, the kiosks, they would have a percentage lease where they pay a fixed amount and then they pay a percentage of the gross sales to the landlord. How about a variable lease? You need to know these different types of leases. A variable lease allows for a gradual increase in rents set at future dates. So I just wrote a lease on a property, and every year there's a 3% increase. Every year. It's a 10-year lease. Every year is a 3%. That would be a variable lease. Okay. Oil and gas leases, Sarah, you run across these a lot, don't you?
Yeah.
You run across these a lot. They are for the oil and gas rates under the ground. So how much do oil and gas rates go for around here, Sarah?
Around here, it might be a little different. It really, I mean, it can even differ just a few miles.
Why? Talk to us. Educate us about oil and gas.
That I don't know. It doesn't make sense, but they project the company like Ascent or Rice or Ascent used to be Chesapeake.
What's that?
Or Ascent is what Chesapeake used to be. Like Chesapeake went to American Energy Utica and then to Ascent. So Ascent's the operator that actually does the drilling.
Okay.
So they project what they think they're gonna pull out of the ground.
Okay. So typically oil and gas lease would determine how much gas is available in that area. Are there active wells already? How much they think they're going to get from it. So it's hard to just say a number. The oil, gas, and mineral rates are worth $3,000 an acre, $4,000 an acre, $5,000 an acre, right?
Yeah, I have some people that, I mean, are getting offered 500 an acre, and then people just like a few miles over that are getting 3,500 an acre, so.
Yeah, so
It's
you can,
crazy how they figured that out, but yeah.
so the best thing to do is not, it's hard, because we run across that a lot, where, especially if we're selling acreage, and somebody sold the oil, gas, and mineral rights, and they maybe have a 50-acre parcel, and then I have another guy who's got 50-acre parcel he wants to list, and he's saying, I have the mineral rights, how much are the mineral rights worth? So that's kind of tricky.
He doesn't want to keep the mineral
He
rights?
wants to convey it.
That's-
Well, no, it's not.
I would keep them.
Personal preference.
Right, well, I live on a farm with gas wells.
Right.
I would never sell,
Right.
ever.
Well, it's more complicated than that sometimes. But you're right, keeping them is a good thing, if you can keep them. So it's a little bit complicated. Typically, you have to get your broker involved and get somebody that, like I have a guy from Washington, that's all he specializes in, is oil, gas, and mineral rights. And when I have a piece of property, I call him up, he has a map, he looks at it, he says, okay, Tom, yeah, they're drilling in that area, there's some gas in that area, you should be able to get this an acre. Or that's a dead area, they're not doing anything right now. So, but the oil, gas, and mineral rights, you can you can sell them, but you can also lease them. And Sarah, you were involved in a couple of leases just recently, right?
That's what I was working on this morning, I just
Leases.
signed people yesterday.
Yeah. And then you could have a lease purchase where you're renting, and then you have an option to purchase the property. And you could have a sale and a lease back, where you can sell the property and then lease it back off to people who bought it off you. Maybe you have a business, Ray, that needs some capital, needs some money, but you don't want to leave the location. You can sell the building and with the condition that you lease it back for a period of time. A management plan and agreement, okay? If you're handling property management. A management plan outlines the owner's objections, what he's trying to accomplish, and what the manager expects to accomplish. So if you're going to be handling property management for a large residential building or whatever, commercial, the owner may say, can you put a management plan together? This is kind of what I'm trying to get out at the end of the result. Can you put a management plan together? And it would analyze three factors: the owner's objections, what he's trying to get out of it, national and neighborhood market, and you want to look at the specific property. And it's kind of a looking forward kind of a plan. And it's all, it's looking forward kind of a plan. And a management agreement is an agency relationship between an owner and a property manager. And a property manager is usually a general agent. Okay. Remember we said that there's a couple different types of agent? There was the universal agent, right, Christine? The universal agent can do what? Anything that owner can do. Anything under the universe. A general agent was that basketball star that promotes the general insurance. He was sitting at the window there. Well, general agent would be usually done for managing a piece of property for somebody. So you can collect the rents, you can write the leases, you can sign the leases, you can make repairs and so forth. And then there's a special agent, right? A special agent is usually what? I'm a special agent in real estate. I'm special, ain't I? Jace? I'm special. At least I want to think I'm special. My wife will tell you I think I'm special. So typically in a real estate transaction, an agent acts as a special agent. But in property management, what kind do they typically act as? A general. Remember that basketball star is sitting in there calling them in. He represents the general insurance, okay? And the property manager has to do the accounting, care for the building. So, no, excuse me, these are the fiduciary responsibilities that they would have: accounting, care, obedience, loyalty, and disclosure. There would be the fiduciary responsibilities. Any question? We're getting through this pretty quickly, aren't we? So let's talk about the elements of a management agreement. So if you had a management agreement, if your broker had a management agreement with somebody, Tam, it would probably have a description of the property, a time period, a definition of the manager's responsibility, just common sense stuff, a statement of the owner's purpose, and the extent of the manager's authority. Okay? Would have reporting requirements. How often does the property manager have to report? It would talk about compensation, allocation of costs. There would be some antitrust language in there, and equal opportunity statement also in that agreement.
Real quick question, I don't want to screw anything up.
You're not.
Property manager still is attached to a broker.
The broker is the only one that can be the property. You have to be a broker to be a property manager.
Okay, well then, all right, that makes sense.
Now, he could have agents working for him, but the broker's the actual property manager would be responsible. So, like if I'm the broker and you're the agent, I'm responsible. I sign the agreement, but yet you could help me with the project, but I have to oversee what you do. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the property manager's responsibility. Involves leasing the property out, managing the property, marketing and maintenance. You have to find out what the goals are for the landlord. And you have to try to achieve those goals. You have to try to generate income, Lauren. Most of the time, when these people buy these big apartment buildings, they look at it as a investment. And they want a property manager who's going to protect their investment and make sure that they're getting their return on their investment. And we call that return a capitalization rate, don't we? You could break that down to a capitalization rate. And you have to preserve and increase the value of the investment. Maybe you have to give some financial reports. You know, you rent the property out, you do the marketing, you select tenants, you collect rents, you maintain good tenant relationships. You know, if somebody's got a problem, you take care of it. All part of it. In Pennsylvania, a property manager serves the public for a fee, must be a broker. That's probably what you'll see on the test with this. Can't be affiliated with a property management firm or a brokerage. Must be an employee of the owner. I'm not sure what, so you may be an employee of the owner. So somebody that's an employee of the owner who is just handling one particular property for that owner, or if that were just that owner's property, may not have to fall under the same licensing as you guys are doing for a residential. If that's the only thing you're doing. Like if I own a big apartment building, 100 units, I may be able to hire somebody and say, Lauren, I'm going to hire you to help me manage this property, but this is the only property you're going to manage, mine. You may not have to have a license to do that. Okay. And a licensee would have an agency relationship with that owner. We talked about that, right? The different agency relationships. They'd be representing the landlord, probably as a seller's agent, or maybe even as a dual agent if they're doing the leases. They may represent the tenant and the landlord. And again, employees of owners do not always require a license if just they're handling that property, Seneca, for that particular owner. Now, if you're working for 5 owners, 2 owners even, may be a problem. But if you're just working for 1 owner, you may be okay. Commissions are usually based on the rent. For example, if the rent is $1,200 a month and the commission is 8%, how much would the commission be at the end of the year? Do the math on it. So the rent's $1,200 a month. And the fee is 8%. How much is the yearly commission? $1,152. Be careful, Ellen, that they don't trick you, because they're going to tell you the rent's $1,200 a month, and they're going to say the commission is 8%. What's 8% of $1,200? What's 8% of $1,200? One of the answers may be 96, but if they're asking for the yearly commission, that's where you got to read these very carefully. Okay. And then there may be some financial reporting, the budget, cash flow projections, profit loss statement. The property manager is typically responsible for setting the rental rates, and they're influenced by supply and demand. And the income that building or unit is generating has to cover the expenses and be able to put some profit in the owner's pocket. And the vacancy rate is indicator of the ability to raise rents. So if you have a unit that's 100% occupied all the time, what's that telling you, Seneca? I know, man, it's in the afternoon. I'm struggling too. I'm struggling. If you have a unit that's 100% occupied all the time, what's that tell you about the rents? Too cheap. If you have a unit that's 50% occupied all the time, what's it tell you about the rents? Too high. So you got to find that happy medium. And usually with residential space, usually it's a monthly amount per unit. With a commercial space, Jace, we do square footage a lot. So I know in the Mon Valley here, some of these companies charge anywhere from $15 to $20 a square foot on commercial. So commercial space is usually square footage. Residential is usually per unit. Maybe a question. I don't know. And again, renting the property, you're going to do marketing, you're going to do advertising, you're going to select tenants. With commercial, you have to find the right tenant for the right space. Okay. And the business interests of the tenant with commercial are important. So, and don't forget, we have to comply with fair housing laws. And we talked about the vacancy rate to being too high or too low, depending on the rates. Collecting the rents, that's pretty common sense stuff. If there's a delinquency, the property manager would try to collect the rents outside of court. Try to, like I have a tenant that's sometimes late on his rents. So, I don't want to have to take him to court and go through all that. So sometimes I give him a phone call. Hey man, can you get your rent in? And, you owe me a late fee because you got it in late. So you want to maintain, the property manager wants to maintain good tenant relationships. High turnover creates more expenses because somebody leaves, you got to go in there, you got to paint, fix, and so forth. you know. Contact good tenants before the renewal date. Say, hey, your lease is gonna be expiring. Isn't this just all common sense stuff, Samantha? Not real hard to figure out. So let's take a break right there. 5 minutes, and then we'll get into federal laws affecting property management.
It takes an hour and a half to get to lunch after.
It's just it's monotonous, right?
Yeah. Ooh.
Just remember that I did plane tickets for April. Jared just got some for June, but. No. I can't stand it.
The past days too, he just been posting, post after post, because Carrie's with that other IP. He's like, yesterday he made conference and things, that's what people are talking about.
I'm doing good, Larry. How you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful.
Okay. I don't know enough about it, about that. Okay, okay. Can you give me the buyer's name and number, and I'll pass it along to the agent? No. Yeah, the name of your buyer. Okay, text me the name and number, and I'll pass it over. What is it? I'll pass it over to the agent. Have that listed.
I like Charlotte Airport, nice and bright.
It is nice.
Yeah.
Like the kiosk that has airplanes, like flying cars,
Okay, I'll see what I can do, Larry.
airplanes
Thank
and
you.
like model airplanes.
Okay, bye-bye.
That's pretty, they should remember I liked it.
Is Cindy available? Me a favor. Look up in the multi-list. We have it listed 521 McCain Avenue. And just text me the agent's name, so I have a lead for it. Okay, then. Bye-bye. Maybe because I didn't go for it.
His name is Steve. Like, he was like, "Here's the one, and then he wanted tomorrow." Like, it's tomorrow, it's going to be on ADHD, autism, Asperger's, and everything.
Okay, what's the best contact number? I just, the number you called from, 724.
My friend Kristen, she's a
Okay.
therapist, she works with kids with autism.
Well, you know what, I'm in class today, so we have
So
4 o'clock.
she's going to be a center here in Austin. It's going to be so
Your number, I can call you back.
autistic.
I can break down, call you back. You know what, it is hard to do, but you know how much time do you
Yeah,
need?
it's definitely moving.
She, Kristen advertised it on the Facebook pages that I'm opening at the center because of the kids with these issues. And somebody's so ignorant of what the belt works was. Like, so she didn't even reply to that, but she was advertising the center for autism, and someone was so ignorant to say the belt works. You have no clue.
It's easy for somebody that doesn't deal with it not to understand and just think that
Yeah,
they can.
you can physically cure behavior with physical force. It doesn't work like that with children with disabilities.
And that's pretty
We
tough.
used to have this one woman in Fayette City used to call in one, truckers to come down to the house to make her kid go to school. And it pissed me off. We're not going to make it to go to school. But she was just at her wit's end. And the kid was in and out of Judy for beating up his mother when she would try to get physical with him and stuff.
I think growing up, our neighbor was the elderly couple who was raising their granddaughter taking all the things. And I remember seeing the cops all the time.
Okay.
The grandmother just couldn't handle
And it's a shame that there's so many grandparents out there raising their grandchildren because stuff going on in the So yeah, you get a 16-year-old, 4 years old, that's a little bit wild, trying to get a 6-7-year-old grandmother to keep them under control.
Okay, I'm excited. I don't think that, if I'm looking at the study guide, I'm gonna pass out the study guide today for you guys. So it'll tell you how many, but leasing and property management has 3% of the brokers, of the salesperson's exam. So there's some areas that have 10% contracts. So I'm gonna pass these study guides out. We're gonna talk about that. So I wanna get through this unit here. So we could do a little bit of review, which I think will be important. We're almost there. It's the last day. Well, it's not the last day. We have 2 more days, but it's the last unit.
Yes.
It's the last unit. Okay. So federal laws affecting property management. This, I would just kind of know these. Americans with Disability Act, ADA. It states that you have to adopt non-discriminatory employment procedures. So it also applies to employment, Garrett, with employees, with employers with 4 or more employees per Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. Discrimination in rental accounts are the biggest complaint with the real estate commission. But so even though the ADA applies to both housing and employment, complaints about housing is the biggest complaint that the real estate commission gets. Discrimination in rental accounts. And they're filed with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Committee and HUD. Ensuring access to services and facilities for people with disabilities under the ADA Act. So you have to conduct a building audit. If you're leasing out a commercial space, you may have to do a building audit to make sure that that commercial space, Seneca, meets the ADA guidelines. Has a ramp, has a handicap accessible bathroom, and so forth. Okay. And you have to, it says, you should be removing barriers that when providing accommodations, if they can be accomplished. Property managers are often responsible for determining whether a building meets the ADA acceptable requirements. A lot of times, Sarah, some of these buildings fall under a grandfather clause. Maybe the bathroom didn't meet ADA requirements 30 years ago when it was put together, but it's still able to be grandfathered in. It's tricky. The equal credit opportunity. So we know ADA pertains to what? Handicapped accessible. And it also, Jace, applies to employment and renting, correct? Then you have the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, where lenders cannot deny a loan based on race, color, religion, national origin, or sex, or people that are getting public assistance, or age, or marital status. Same application has to be for everybody. Same procedures, Bonnie, for everybody. If you ask for a credit check, let's say you're property manager or working with your broker to rent out places. If you ask for a credit check before you show, Tam, you have to ask everybody for a credit check. You can't pick and choose who you're going to ask for a credit check, because that could be construed as discriminating. Does that make sense? One procedure, you follow it through. The Fair Housing Act. So all leasing practices must comply with fair housing laws. And again, discrimination in rentals is the basis for most complaints. I would know that, Paul Kelly. I would know that.
What did you just say to know?
I would know that discrimination in rentals is the basis for most complaints to the Real Estate Commission. And commercial and residential law are covered under commercial and residential properties are covered under Pennsylvania law. Then the Fair Housing Act. We talked about this. Prohibits discrimination in rentals based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, and disability. No steering. What's steering? If I'm showing a tenant, I'm showing Vonnie rental properties. What would be steering? Right?
When you're steering somebody to a different.
Vaughn, you may want to rent over here. There's more people like you over here. Right? You can't get into any of that stuff. Man, sometimes I teach these classes, I go home, my knees are shaking. Really? Because there's a lot, isn't there? There's a lot on a day-to-day you got to do. But if you're just fair and honest, most of the time everything works its way out. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
allow tenants with disabilities to make their own reasonable accommodations. You don't tell them. Guy pulls up in a wheelchair to look at a second-story apartment, and there's only steps going, there's no elevator. Don't stop the guy and say, don't even get out of the van. You're not gonna like this unit because it's a second-story apartment. Let him make that decision. It's just not your place to make that decision.
Have a heck of a time getting up there.
Excuse me?
Have a heck of a time getting up there.
It don't matter. Maybe you don't need to go up there to rent it.
Sure.
Maybe he looks at it and says, I'll put a ramp up there, or I'll put an elevator, or I'll have somebody carry me. It don't matter. It's not your place.
That's right.
And as soon as you start using that common sense logic, bam, you're in trouble. That's that's how you get in trouble right there. You know what I'm saying? So, because it would be common sense. Guy on the second floor, it does. Throw all that out. Everybody has a right to live where they want to live. It's not your choice to tell. It's not your place to tell them.
Snap your W-2 and file. If you've chosen the apartment industry for your career, chances are you know a lot about fair housing laws. But why are discrimination lawsuits so common? And what can you do to make sure you're never involved in one? You're probably very familiar with the 7 protected classes defined by the Fair Housing Act. You know, race, religion, nationality, color, sex, familial status, and disability status. Chances are good that your state or city has even more protected classes than the federal government. Did you know in Washington, D.C., it's illegal to treat people differently because of their political affiliation? It's true. If you don't know the additional protected classes in your area, find out. In fair housing terms, discrimination means treating someone differently because of their membership in a protected class. And it's against the law. Most multifamily professionals don't intentionally discriminate, but fair housing lawsuits happen, in many cases because people make mistakes. So let's run through Grace Hill's top 10 fair housing mistakes so you can make sure these missteps never happen at your community. Ready? Let's count them down. Number 10, forbidding kids from doing things, like saying children may not ride bikes on the sidewalk. Your rules can't be different for kids or people with kids. They're part of a protected class, familial status. Instead, say no bicycle riding on the sidewalk. Number 9, asking a prospective resident, how many children do you have? This may seem like a polite conversation starter, but you don't want your customer to think you're treating them differently just because of their family size. Number 8, not realizing your state or city has protected classes in addition to the 7 in the Fair Housing Act. You've got to do your research on this one. The HUD website is a great place to start. Number 7, not keeping good records about your leasing tours. Document everything, including the apartments you showed and the rental rates you offered. Number 6, denying a rental application because you had a bad feeling about a customer. That's totally not okay. Stick to your community's qualification guidelines. Number 5, refusing to create a reserved parking spot for a resident with a disability because you have plenty of handicapped parking already. It's always wise to meet a resident's accommodation request if you can. Involve your supervisor before saying no. Number 4, telling a resident they can't have a service animal because you don't accept pets. Listen closely because this is important. A service animal is not a pet. You are required by law to allow them, whether it's a dog, a monkey, or even a miniature pony. Number 3, not realizing that hoarding isn't just the stuff of reality TV shows. It's a disability. Proceed with caution if you discover a resident is hoarding. Talk with your boss at once. Number 2, letting your maintenance team complete service requests in any order they like. To avoid
So you
any
just have to have a
appearance of
system.
preferential
You just
treatment,
apply the system, Tammy, to
establish a
everybody.
response system and stick to it. And the number 1 fair housing mistake is failing to train everyone who interacts with customers on fair housing requirements. And we mean everyone: leasing, management, maintenance. If they talk to the public, they need to be trained. Don't let
I guess we need to just treat everybody fairly. Treat everybody the same, and you'll be okay. And you'll be okay.
So I'm curious, so he said to go to the HUD website to find out if your city or state have different things. Where would that be?
I don't know. I don't know.
mean,
You would have, what he's saying is go find out if your local or state laws are more restrictive than the federal. And they could be. Okay? They could be. But I wouldn't worry about that, Vaughn, because if you're going in that direction, you're spending time on something you don't need to for the, I'm just telling you, you don't need to for the test.
Right.
Because I would just know that the highlights that I've touched base with zipping through this unit here, Jason. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to touch base on just the highlights. Property management and risk management. Because basically a property manager is trying to balance providing services with cost for the unit. You know, satisfy the tenant's needs while maximizing the owner's or the landlord's profit. Contracts for maintenance. You know, trying to shop around and get the best deal on snow removal, grass cutting, so forth. And well-maintained, high-service properties can command premium rents. Common sense, isn't it? Risk management, another part of risk management is tenant security. You got to elevate the procedures to protect your tenants from unauthorized entry. So if you have an apartment building, and you're the property manager, you may want to have a lock on the front door that the tenant has a key to get into the lock, but nobody else does. So some stranger off the street just can't come in and roam through. So some of that could be your responsibility, Ray, to look and see, are you creating a safe environment for your tenants? Preventive maintenance, routine maintenance, always, you know, trying to improve the property so you can maximize the owner's profit, because a well-maintained building is going to get more rents. Renovate and modernize where acceptable. Okay. The figure on 22.5, what page is that on?
571.
What is it?
477.
So reasonable modifications. Provide doors with automatic opening mechanisms for handicap. Okay. Install an intercom so customers can contact the second floor business in a building without an elevator. You know, add grab bars to public restrooms. Provide a shopper's assistant to help disabled customers. My mom goes to Walmart. She loves going in that little electric vehicle. Really, she does. She goes, she drives around, and I tag along behind her and, you know, pull her out when she gets stuck. She always gets stuck back by the women's pajamas. She always goes back here and gets stuck every time. So those are some things that modifications that could be made to a business. Because remember, ADA applies to a business also, or a residence. Several court decisions have held landlords responsible for harm inflicted by intruders. So if you have an apartment building, Christine, and you may want to think about having a lock on that front door that only the tenants can get in and out. May want to install videotaping equipment. What will happen if something goes wrong? Try to think ahead. You know, maybe control it, install sprinklers, fire doors, avoid it, remove sources. Maybe it's, you know, like a swimming pool. I don't know if that's a good example. Some people would love to rent a place with a swimming pool. But maybe if it's a hazard, you may want to get rid of that swimming pool. Retain it, but insure it with a large deductible or transfer it. Take it out of the insurance policy completely. So just little things that can the property manager can do. You only can insure what is owned. So a tenant, does anybody rent in here? Okay, do you know you can get rentals insurance to cover for what you own? So if you're renting, you don't own the building, right? You own the personal property, you can get insurance to cover that. The landlord can insure the real property with his insurance. Now, condominium insurance, the condominium association insures the outside and all the common ground. The owner just insures the interior walls and the inside. Okay, because the exterior and the common area is owned by, how is that owned? By tenants in what? Common. So if there's 100 units, they all own a 100th interest in those common areas. And they would all pay 100th of the exterior insurance. Does that make sense? Maybe you should do an insurance audit every year just to make sure and make recommendations to the property owner. In multi-peril policy, perils are what's insured: fire, hazard, liability, casualty insurance, natural events. These all can be insured. And licensees cannot personally profit from expenses. Licensees cannot personally profit from expenditures on behalf of the principal. So you can't get, I'll let you know 1 second here, kickbacks. So if I'm managing a property and somebody wants to come put a roof in, I can't accept a bid from them. If they say, Tom, give me this bid, I'll kick you back $100. It's illegal. Rebates or undisclosed fees, they're all illegal. Any questions about this section? Okay, Andrea, thank you very much. We got through 23 units.